Hey everyone, it's time to put on our mining hats and our scuba suits because we will be digging through the inner workings of keys and taking a deep dive into the construction of chords. Are you ready for this? I think so, because you've got the tools you need already, and those tools are in the key of C.
Before we go on, it's helpful to brush up on some of our musical rules and labeling procedures, beginning with a C major scale, C to C. We know that we label notes with Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and we label chords with Roman numerals, remembering that the 1, 4, and 5 are always major, 2, 3, and 6 are always minor, 7 is diminished, and 8 is also a 1 chord. We've got some rules for minor too, but we'll get to that later. For now, our C major rules are what we need.
The thing about music, as with any subject with mathematical structure, is that everything is intertwined and connected. C major and A minor may be direct relatives, but all keys are related to each other in roundabout ways. So we need the key of C to figure out where to go next, and let me show you how.
First step is to start with the 5. There's been a couple of special features about the 5 that we've learned so far. It leads nicely back into 1, it gets special rules in a minor key, it's part of the pop, blues, and turnaround progressions, and here it serves a very useful purpose. There's actually a weird reason for this. Given how much we, as humans, like things symmetrical and pattern-based, 3 notes pop up a lot in all kinds of music, regardless of country or culture. The intervals 4, 5, and 8, also called the octave. And the thing is, if you take a string, like for instance the C string on an ukulele, and cut it in half with your finger, you get an octave. If you cut it into another common fraction, 2/3, you get the 5th interval, or G. And if you cut it into 3/4, you get the 4th interval, in this case F. 1/2, 2/3, 3/4. Our ears just like this. And why?
Why does the number 3 occur so often in fairy tales? Why are pizzas usually cut into 8 slices? Why did different cultures with no interaction decide to build pyramids? It's just part of what makes us human. We like certain things.
So back to our 5th note of the C major scale. That note is G. And here is the next step. We are going to build a G major scale. What we need to do first is write out all of the notes, from low G to high G, in music alphabetical order. Here's an important step worth mentioning, but not something we're going to use right away. You've got to keep all the sharps and flats from before. In the case of C major, this is obviously pretty easy since there aren't any. So we have A, B, C, D, E, and F. But we're not done yet. This is still basically a C major scale, but starting on G. We've got to change one specific note, and it's this one, the 7th. Though we've sort of been making fun of the 7th, it's now become very important. It's the note that makes all the difference. What we do is raise it by 1/2 step, which is symbolized by a sharp sign. It goes from F to F sharp.
Wait, half what? Well, the distance between notes is not just described as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc. That's just for scales. For any note anywhere, we describe the distance between 2 notes as steps. On uks and other fretted instruments, this is really easy to see. 1 fret to the next is a half step. Likewise, skipping a fret is described as a whole step. Got it? It's important, but not crucial you remember this now. We'll keep coming back to it.
So back to our G major scale. We've got the notes laid out, but what about the chords? Here, our musical rules come in to save the day. 1, 4, and 5 are still major, and 2, 3, and 6 are still minor. 7 is still diminished, and the 8th note, the octave, is also 1. All of this means that the chords that occur within the key of G, the diatonic chords, are G, A minor, B minor, C, E minor, and D major, our new chord. Some things worth pointing out here. There are chords we already know how to play, specifically G, A minor, C, and E minor. This is important to remember. Chords can happen naturally in several different keys. Something else to take note of is the chord we don't know how to play, B minor. That will come later, so don't worry. Also notice chords we know that aren't in the key of G, D minor, F, and E7. These are now all outside chords, at least in the key of G.
Confused yet? Well, don't worry. We're going to get a ton more practice with this, starting with revisiting our practice in C chord progression.
Remember this? The chord progression where we first learned how to label chords and eventually combined with the C major scale. Let's play through it one time to remember what it sounds like. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, good. It's not a problem. Now it's time to apply our knowledge of G major. Before we can do that, let's label those chords again from practice in C. 1, 5, 6, 4, 1, 4, 5, 1. Good. Now the second line. 6, 5, 4, 1, 4, 1, 5, and 1.
What we're going to do next also has a specific musical term. We are going to transpose. That means we are going to change, or move, if you will, all of our chords, but we are going to move them all the same amount. So, here's the next step.
Never mind the chords from practice in C. As it turns out, they're not that important. Just look at the Roman numerals and match them to the chords in G major. So what does 1 become? G. And how about 5? D. Minor 6 becomes E minor, and 4 becomes C. Now we can fill in the rest of these. G, C, D, G, and the bottom line. E minor, D, C, G, C, G, D, and finally G. Practice in C has now morphed into practice in G. So let's play this 4 strums per chord, just like with practice in C. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
This is a brand new progression, but you'll notice how it feels, or at least sounds, incredibly familiar. And that's because you are still playing the same chord progression as before, but in a different key. While we've taken small steps into a larger musical world here and there, this is more of a leap. We've just opened up a whole new world of tools to work with. Nice. And with this new understanding, we're ready for the next big topic of this video, spelling out chords.
By spelling out chords, I don't mean spelling C major as C-M-A-J-O-R. Wouldn't it be nice if it was that easy? Unfortunately, it's not. However, the real way of doing this isn't too difficult either. All we need is a couple of major scales and the ability to count. First, let's start with two facts we already know. Your basic chord has 3 different notes, and one of them is the root note. Okay, so that leaves 2 mystery notes. To find them, let's look at our C major scale. C is not only the root note of the C chord, but as note number 1 is also the root note of the scale as well. Here's what comes next. In addition to our root note, we also need the 3rd and the 5th. And in C, that's E and G. So a C major chord is spelled as such. C, E, G. Voila.
That's great, you say, but what if we want to spell out other chords? Well, then we can just use other scales.
We now also know the G major scale, so let's spell a G major chord. Start with the 1, or root, then add the 3rd and the 5th. Boom! A G major chord is spelled G, B, D.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is pretty limited. Am I telling you that you need to know every major and minor scale to spell out every chord? Don't worry, no. This is the foundation of how a chord is built, but you don't need to know every scale right this minute. There's another way to go about doing this, but having 2 major scales can help.
Like most things in life, there's a pattern. Notice how with C, we started at the beginning, and then skipped a note, and then skipped another note, and that gave us the answer. Did the same thing happen with the G scale? It most certainly did. But what if we tried this pattern with the G in a C major scale? Try it. Skip a note, and assuming our scale keeps going on, skip another note. And what happens? Once again, we've got G, B, D. And why did this work?
Because G is 5, and 5 is, say it with me, always major.
So knowing this, we can use the skip a note pattern to spell any chord, as long as we know a key that it shows up in. And with the knowledge of 2 keys now firmly in our brain, that gives us quite a few options. For instance, say we want to find out how to spell E minor. Does it happen in either of our keys? As it turns out, it happens in both. Let's use the key of C to spell this chord. Start with E, the root, and then skip a note, and skip a note, and we get E, G, B. Or how about A minor? Let's investigate. Again, it naturally occurs in both of our keys. But this time, let's use the key of G. Start with the root, then skip a note, and skip a note. And what do we have? A, C, E. How about our new chord of D major? Well, D is minor in the key of C, so that's a no-go. But not in the key of G, so we can do it. Start with the root note D, skip a note, and skip a note. And what do we have? D, F sharp, A.
Now, these are not all the rules that go into spelling a chord. We still have E7, which doesn't occur naturally in either of our major keys, or even in the key of A minor for that matter. It has some special rules around it, and there's some more information regarding the difference between major and minor chords, but I think this is enough information for now. However, before we get to our last topic, there's one more issue to address with chord spelling.
Spelling out chords the way we have is very linear and easy to understand, but you might have noticed that's not exactly how we played them. If you went back to our fingerboard chart from Workbook 1 and compared it to how we play, for instance, C, you would find that, in order of the strings, the chord is played G, C, E, C, or that G is played G, D, G, B. Seems all jumbled up, right? Well, good news. Being jumbled isn't a problem, because no matter what order C, E, and G are in, it's still a C chord. The order does matter, sort of. Reorder the notes and it will sound slightly different, but there's a term for this too: voicing.
Voicing is the technique used to emphasize one note in a chord over all of the others, and is part of what's called harmonizing, or combining certain notes with certain chords. This is the reason practice in C is constructed the way it is. It harmonizes the C major scale. It's a tricky concept and takes time to get a good feel for, but let's take a closer look at practice in G. We now have the basic tools to understand how the notes and chords work together.
Remember what the G major scale looks like and sounds like. And consider the 4 chords we use in practice in G and how they're spelled. Which of these fit with our G note? Well, we find the G note is in 3 of the 4 chords, but let's start where it's the root. Moving on to our A note, we see that it's found in only one chord, D. So that's an easy choice. With B, we again find that note in 2 different chords, but I'm going with E minor. And why? Because with C, I've only got one option. And if I start with a sequence like G, D, E minor, C, I've also started with the pop chord progression.
Unfortunately, this won't work for the rest of the scale, but let's see what else we can do.
I've got 2 options for the next chord, but after the pop chord progression, I want to resolve. So I'm going to choose G to go here. Then I'm also thinking about working up to using G at the end of this line, so I'm going to go with C and then D, since it's our only choice for F sharp anyway, and then finish with G.
So that takes care of our first line, but as we work our way back down the G major scale, we want to do things a little differently. And for that, we can see how the chords we choose do make a difference.
On the second line, you'll notice we stay on G. We have 3 options for which chord to use here, but I think it sounds cool if we reharmonize it, meaning that the note stays the same, but the chord changes. So I'm going with E minor, because our next chord has to be D, and then we can walk down to C, and then we can resolve to G. Lastly, I've got no choice but to harmonize C and A with the C chord and the D chord, but in both cases, I want to resolve to G. And since the B and the G notes are both in the G chord, we can do that. And just like that, we have put together our practice in G exercise, chords and notes combined. You have now seen the inner workings behind it.
Our last task is to play through this, like we did with practice in C, both with the scales and the chords. Only with our G scale, it presents a few issues that we didn't have with our C scale. Namely, it goes much higher on the neck than we've played before. So we're going to approach this in 2 different ways. The first one we'll do by dropping the octave midway through the scale, meaning we'll drop to a lower version of a note that we were about to play to avoid having to go much higher on the fretboard. Technically, it's a little easier, but we'll also try the full octave, though this will require us to rely more on tablature to play it.
Let's look at the scale on the staff. We've already reviewed the system of lines and spaces, looked at some ways to remember where the notes are, and gone over the C major scale. But this time, we're starting on G. An interesting thing to take note of here. All by itself, what does the treble clef look like? Couldn't you just swear it reminds you of something? It kind of looks like a really fancy G, and that's not an accident. There are 3 main clef shapes. Treble is all we're using, but we also have bass clef and what's technically called movable C clef, but is most commonly known as alto clef, and they are all meant to represent a certain letter. G for treble, F for bass, and C for alto. As the design of these symbols evolved, their purpose was to remind you of where notes were, and with treble, it tells you, sort of, that G is on the second line.
Just a reminder that all of this is supposed to make music easier to read, not harder. And a reminder that best intentions really don't work sometimes.
But regardless, the treble clef is what we ended up with. So let's advance up the staff, from G to A, B, C, and now we're going to move higher than we did with the C scale, to D, E, F sharp, and then G. But wait, you say, there's no sharp sign by that F note. Well, you're half correct. The sharp sign is actually over here. And why? Because it's part of another meant to make things easier idea. When developing the system, folks thought, what would be better, writing a sharp for every single F we might use, or writing one sharp at the beginning of each line to remind you that all Fs are sharp?
Plus, if we can remember that the G major scale is the scale that has only one sharp, which, as far as major scales go, is basically true, this could be useful shorthand for telling us that we are in the key of G. So, the system stuck, and the sharps and flats in front of a clef became known as a key signature.
So now that we've got the notes on the staff, let's decode it with tablature. First four notes we know already: 3rd fret, open string, 2nd fret, and 3rd fret. But now we're at a crossroads. Do we proceed higher than we've gone before, or do we stick to things we know? Fortunately, we can try both ways. At this D, we're going to drop it down to the lower D on the staff. This is what I mean by drop the octave. We'll drop all the other notes that come after in the same way, and proceed up. 2nd fret, open string, 2nd fret, and ending on 3rd fret G again. Let's play this together, holding each note for 4 beats. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very good, everyone. But now let's try it the other way, bringing our lowered notes back up an octave so it's more like our original C scale, lowest note to highest.
However, if we start down here, we're going to end up playing most of our notes on one string, like I showed you before. Nothing technically wrong with that, but let's see if we can keep our notes closer together.
We're going to utilize those dots on the 7th and 10th frets and take advantage of something unique to stringed instruments. The 3rd fret on the E string is not the only place where we can play G. We can also play it with the open G string and the 7th fret on the C string. And if we start there, we don't need to shift our hand up to get to that high G. We're already in the neighborhood. Let me show you how. From the 7th fret, we'll go to the 9th fret, which is A, then up a string to the next 7th fret, B, then 8th fret, which is C, then 10th fret, D, then up one more string to the 7th fret, E, then 9th fret, F sharp, and we arrive at the high G on the 10th fret. And the whole thing sounds like this. Let's try it together. Again, whole notes for each note. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We're going to want to remember that pattern for playing the full octave G scale. It might not seem important right now, but it will. But in any case, time for our last step. Let's try playing this. Just like with practice in C, we'll play the G major scale first, using whole notes going up, then down. Then we'll switch to chords, 4 strums each, quarter note pulse. For the video, I'm going to play the full octave, but feel free to practice with the dropped octave version if you want to. Okay, everyone, ready?
1, 2, 3, and.
Well done, everyone. In case you thought this was a huge amount of information and you feel overwhelmed, just think of it as the first day at a new school. You might not know anyone's name or where anything is yet, but soon enough, it will be your second home. Because we are going to continue to dig and dive deeper as we make our way through more songs and more keys, starting with the next video where we begin our search for the pop chord progression in songs in the key of G. Until then, later everyone.